Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I am delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leader series, Rethinking Energy Management in the Digital Age. My name is Megan Purdy and I'm from Engineers Australia. Firstly, in keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started today, I would like to acknowledge that our webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, ABB. ABB is a leading global technology company that pushes the boundaries of technology to enable the transformation of society and industry to achieve a more productive, sustainable future. Innovation has been in its DNA since they were founded more than 130 years ago to take advantage of a new technology called electricity. Now today we'll hear from 3 speakers followed by a live audience Q&A, so I encourage you all to send your questions through to our speakers via the chat box. I would now like to welcome our moderator for today, Lisa France. Lisa is the Business Development Manager, Power and Energy in the Urban and Renewables team at SMEC. Her significant expertise and insight into the resources and energy sector are founded on more than 25 years of experience as an international leader and advisor with demonstrated successes across engineering, environmental services and corporate affairs. Lisa is a globally recognised environmental scientist who has represented Australia's resources interests internationally through her elected positions. Lisa's political acumen, pragmatism and drive for affirmative solutions to environmental challenges are highly valued by industry organisations and stakeholders. As principal of an energy, environment and climate advisory group, Lisa's technical skills and global experience have been invaluable in significant and complex resource and infrastructure projects. As Australia continues to debate the future of energy, Lisa remains a trusted advisor and vocal advocate for a sustainable transition. Please welcome Lisa France.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome again to our viewers who have joined us today. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Luke Menzel. Luke is CEO at the Energy Efficiency Council, the peak body for Australia's energy efficiency, energy management, demand response industry, which aim to make sensible, cost-effective demand-side measures a standard practice across the Australian economy. Luke is Vice President of the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council and is co-chair of the Australia-Germany Energy Efficiency Sub-Working Group. He also sits on the NABERS National Steering Committee, the Queensland Government's Ministerial Energy Council, and the Victorian Government's Clean Economy Skills and Job Task Force. Please welcome Luke Menzel.
Hi everybody, and thank you Lisa, and special thanks to Engineers Australia for organising what I think is a really timely discussion of the role of energy efficiency and energy management in the myriad of crises that we're all working our way through in 2022. As Lisa no doubt said, I'm Luke Menzel, CEO of the Energy Efficiency Council. I've been asked to do a bit of a scene setter for a conversation that we picked up by Malad and then hopefully unpacked in a really fulsome Q&A both with Lisa and Malad as we sort of dig into some of the detail of what businesses can do to take control of their energy costs with smart energy management. So the obligatory discussion of the EEC and who we are. We're a peak body for organisations that are passionate about the role of energy management in the transition to a net zero economy. So we've got over 100 members, everything from small 2-person consultancies to multinational corporations like ABB, and everything in between, as well as universities. We've got a bunch of industry associations that are members, local governments. So it's a pretty diverse network, but also united in this common cause of making sure we put energy efficiency at the heart of the energy transition. And we do a lot of work on policy. We do a lot of work on skills and training. We do projects and research, and of course we run events and do a lot of work, effectively helping to inform energy users about the opportunities they have to take control of their energy position with smart energy management. So what are we going to cover today? I'm going to spend a bit of time on the strategic drivers. They're shifting really quickly in 2022. It's actually worth spending a little bit of time unpacking that for you all, because across policy, across carbon, particularly across the way that costs are playing out in gas and electricity markets, there's a lot going on, which businesses need to keep an eye on as they're looking to secure their energy position. I'm then going to take you through some of the key resources that the Energy Efficiency Council has pulled together over the journey that I think are really useful for businesses that are looking to get across this space. I would acknowledge that many of the individuals that have dialed in today are going to be relative experts in energy, in energy management, in the transition that's working its way through our energy markets. But businesses are looking to take advantage of all of these technologies and all these strategies in a holistic way. And that means bringing a whole bunch of people into the conversation that aren't necessarily experts. And so having these sorts of resources that you can use to upskill people within your business, to fill some of the knowledge gaps that you yourself may have, always useful. And then I'm going to close with where to go for help. And there's government programs that are available. And then obviously there's professionals and organisations that can support businesses along that journey. So let's start with the strategic drivers, and this will be a photo that some of you will have seen rolling through your news feeds. Obviously, we've got a new government in Australia, one that has significantly raised Australia's ambition around 2030 targets. We now have bipartisan support for net zero by 2050. But Labor took some other things to the election as well, a $20 billion Rewiring the Nation plan, which was making sure that our network infrastructure, specifically our transmission infrastructure, was fit for purpose in bringing on board a whole bunch of new renewable generation. In terms of companies and kind of the support and the framework that companies have for lowering their emissions, it was really about taking a policy called the Safeguard Mechanism, which was introduced under Greg Hunt in the Abbott government, and strengthening that, revamping that. The baselines for the Safeguard Mechanism, which is effectively a baseline and credit scheme, haven't been particularly high. They're looking to lower those over time. There's a whole consultation process underway. This is a relatively uncontroversial move at a high level, and in terms of principles, there's a lot of support from organisations like our Group and the Business Council of Australia for using the Safeguard Mechanism. The detail might be more contentious, but that's something the government's going to be working through over the next year or so. Separate from government and almost in spite of government, we've also seen net zero commitments from businesses themselves skyrocketing. And so this is a metric from ACSI, who have been tracking net zero commitments from ASX 200 companies. You can see back in 2020, it was as low as 14. 2021, it was significantly raised to 49. And as of March 2022, we were up to 95 companies. So that's almost half of the ASX 200. But worth noting, it's actually 70% of market capitalisation. So the companies that haven't yet committed to net zero are tending to be smaller companies in that cohort of ASX 200 companies. So you can see the conversation is shifting incredibly quickly at that corporate level. This is something that as a strategic driver, companies are realising that they really need to build this into their thinking in terms of how their business is operating over the next number of years. Since we're talking about net zero, I thought I might just pause and reflect on the role of energy efficiency and energy management in achieving those net zero targets. This is a graph from the IEA's Net Zero by 2050 report, which was released last year. This is about total demand. So this is the total task we have in terms of decarbonising our electricity system. And you can see that there's some key chunks of activity that are absolutely crucial for having a demand profile, having a load in each of these industries that are being contemplated here that is manageable in terms of that transition. So efficiency plays a huge role. Electrification, which has a strong efficiency component, often when you're moving from a gas boiler to a heat pump, there's a significant efficiency dividend in terms of switching over that load. And then, of course, behaviour change, just changing the way we live our lives. More public transport, potentially living in smaller, more efficient homes. These are sorts of things that the IEA is starting to contemplate in terms of that longer term transformation on that journey to net zero by 2050. So it's just to underline the fact that efficiency has a really significant role to play in that journey to net zero. And indeed, the IEA's net zero scenario that they released in that report last year found that efficiency was delivering 40% of the abatement that we need by 2040 to get on track for net zero by 2050. Now, we don't spend 40% of our time talking about efficiency. I spend a lot of my time talking about it, but as a nation, we don't spend that much time talking about it. So that's something that we can have more of a focus on over time. So switching gears a little bit, we have a grid that is decarbonising, obviously, and we like to talk about the difference between the 20th century energy system and the 21st century energy system. So it's fairly linear in a way. So you had big, large-scale generators feeding into transmission networks, then into distribution networks, and buildings and industry were sort of hanging off the side. We're moving to a 21st century energy system, which is complicated. This graph is more about the vibe of the thing rather than any kind of sort of technical schematic, but it's just to give you a sense that there's a lot more complexity in the 21st century energy system than we've had before, and there's a lot more resources at play, both at the large scale, feeding into those transmission networks, but also at the distribution network scale. And we see in many places around the country the proliferation of small-scale solar, really, as well as, providing incredible dividends in terms of cost reduction and in terms of carbon reduction, also causing some challenge for distribution networks that market operators are needing to manage. So this is only going to accelerate. So this graph is from the most recent integrated system plan released in June 2022. You can see that over those out years, coal has all but disappeared. There is still a bit of a role for peaking gas generation, but the vast bulk of generation in the system is distributed PV, utility scale solar, and wind, and all those resources will continue to grow. This is from the central scenario, what's called the step change scenario. This is the consensus scenario for what our energy system is going to look like out to 2050. Importantly, there's two transformations going on here. The first one is obviously the transformation on the supply side of the electricity system. The second one is electrification of a huge amount of the load that's on the demand side behind the meter. So residential heating and cooling load, low temperature process heat in industry, or like the bulk of load in this step change scenario is seen to be electrified. There is obviously a role for other technologies, biogas, biomethane, hydrogen, but in terms of the step change scenario, the central scenario, the vast bulk of decarbonisation is happening through electrification paired with renewables. Now, the quality of that electrification matters quite a lot. And this is a residential example from a US paper from Hussaini and Livingood. I recommend you check it out. It's quite a good one. It just helps to unpack, some of the trade-offs that we've got and some of the strategies we can bring to bear on that transition task. And the picture on the left is just letting things happen, really, which is much of what's been happening in Australia over the last little while. There's no efficiency, there's no load shaping, there's quite a lot of solar, and you can see there's quite a high need for storage in that scenario. And then what Hussaini and Livingood do is they overlay several strategies, effectively to minimize the amount of storage that you need. Storage is quite expensive. It makes sense if you've got more cost-effective strategies to bring them to bear, so you can minimize the amount of storage, and that lowers the total cost of the system transition, which is kind of a key metric that we need to stay focused on. So the first thing that Hosani and Living Good do in this scenario is they make sure that the load is efficient, and they, to the degree possible, shift it to times of the day where the solar resource is available. And you can see already the storage requirements coming down. And then you can overlay some other strategies on top of that. Obviously, diversified generation, so that's about the geographic location of where you're getting your energy from, can make a big difference. Interconnectors and the like, incredibly important. The rewiring the nation piece that I was speaking to before, also potentially playing a critical role. And then the final piece of the puzzle from Hosani and Living Good's perspective is oversizing the availability of those generation resources. Now, oversizing is going to play a role, but the critical thing to bear in mind from my perspective is there's a big difference between oversizing by 3 times and oversizing by 5 times in terms of the total system costs. So where we have other strategies, and efficiency and energy management is a critical strategy, bringing that to bear on the task as early as possible can really lower the total system costs, the need for oversizing. And these are kind of the trade-offs that we need to manage as we work through this transition. So, changing gears again, the final strategic driver that I'm going to talk to is around energy prices. These electricity futures for 2023, they've tripled over the last year. And while they are going down over the next couple of years, they're going down to levels above what they were in the previous energy crisis in 2017, which, while we were all running around and setting our hair on fire back in 2017, it's now starting to look like something of a warm bath. Things are bad out there if you're a business that's reliant on electricity. If you're an electricity-intensive business, it's worse though if you're a gas-intensive business. So this is the netback metric used by the ACCC, effectively the export parity metric, and they're expecting that gas prices will be sitting around $50 a gigajoule till the end of the year, slowly coming down to $25 a gigajoule over the next couple of years. That's still incredibly high compared to historical trends, incredibly challenging for gas-intensive businesses. Businesses are using gas for heat or using as a feedstock. And the reality is we're still facing an incredibly volatile situation in world gas markets. As I record, there is news of the Russia withdrawing gas from certain Eastern European nations. This is going to be an incredibly volatile situation and a challenging one for businesses here in Australia, but also around the world that are reliant on gas. So that brings us to, I guess, the critical role of energy management. There's a bunch of stuff that I've just been through, which is outside of the control of any particular business, but there's a huge amount which is within the control of many businesses. And many businesses over the last 5 years, I mentioned the energy crisis in 2017. That was a bit of an inflection point for many businesses where energy got elevated to a strategic level. And so a lot of the basic strategies for kind of getting control of your energy position started to be adopted by businesses that hadn't yet done so, acknowledging that there were a bunch of businesses that had already been on this journey. So we're on this learning curve as a nation. We've gone from a nation which, for many businesses, happily, they enjoyed low energy costs for a very long time. We are seeing those energy costs rising over time. We're seeing those concerns over emissions rising over time, and those two sort of twin drivers are resulting in a much closer focus and interest in how energy is being managed. So we've been doing a bunch of work in this space. We've been working with businesses right across the country, indeed, with the support of all of our members in this, I guess, literacy building exercise, supporting businesses in all kinds of ways that they tell us are helpful. And it all comes back to three big strategies. Having a granular understanding in terms of energy use across a business, what's happening in particular sites, what's happening with particular loads, and then looking at what the efficiency, generation, demand management opportunities are that can help manage those energy costs. And then, of course, procurement, which back in the day was often set and forget. No longer the case. Having a laser-like focus on procurement, different procurement options available is becoming increasingly important. I'm now going to shift gears in the presentation. I'm going to take you through some of the resources that we've created on this front. And this is all under the banner of navigating a dynamic energy landscape. We've been doing this since 2017, where we were just starting to get a whole bunch of questions from businesses right across the country around, what they can do to secure their energy position in what was a pretty challenging space. Now, there's a suite of resources in this portfolio. We start with our annual energy briefing document. This is where we started. It's really about giving an executive or a director on a board a strong sense of what's going on in gas and electricity markets and what they can do about it. So it goes through how the electricity market works. It breaks down the components of your bill in terms of wholesale costs, retail costs, network costs, and environmental costs. It goes through the structure of gas markets. It also goes through what you can do to take control of your energy position. So looking at efficiency, demand management, renewables, both on-site and off-site, and also, as I said, that procurement piece. So it's a good high-level overview of what's been happening over the last year, and then the things that you can do to take control. And importantly, in that document, businesses work with us to provide their best practice case studies. So it's not just theoretical; it's about what businesses are actually doing in their own organisations to drive change. Then we have what we call sector spotlights, and we've been rolling these out over the years, and we continue to roll them out. So far, we've done manufacturers, we've done government agencies, we've done office-based businesses, and we've done farms. And so in these sector spotlights, we come down from the stratosphere and actually get down into particular industries and look in a more focused way on what opportunities exist in those different sectors. Manufacturing, I'd say, has a bunch of information that's also relevant to food processors. But for the most part, from sector to sector, there's different drivers and barriers. There's different levels of literacy. There's different technologies that you can leverage to take control of your energy position. So it's important to get down to this sectoral level so that we can start working through those opportunities and those barriers. This is a really useful one. We actually produced this with Australian Industry Group and with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. This came out in 2018. It is more relevant than ever. This is a detailed technical look at the opportunities that exist within many gas-intensive businesses to improve their position through energy efficiency. It goes into quite a lot of detail, but it also has a look at those fuel switching opportunities that go beyond energy efficiency to that electrification piece. In Australia, there has been a little bit of activity around electrification of industrial processes, particularly low temperature industrial processes. We're probably behind some of our friends in Europe in terms of that electrification piece, but the technology is pretty mature. And I anticipate that the kind of challenges that we're seeing in terms of gas markets are going to see the leveraging of heat pumps, in particular in industrial applications, really start to be something that businesses are looking closely at. And there's a little bit of information on this guide to that end. This is actually a super important one, and I should state that I'm not a tax expert, so I won't be able to answer your detailed questions. You definitely need to get advice from a qualified expert if you're looking to leverage these incentives. But there is a time-bound opportunity to make investments in energy efficiency and energy management upgrades that going to stack up pretty well, one would think, given the unit cost of energy. But what could get them across the line is the availability of temporary full expensing, instant asset write-offs, and the like. Incentives that go through to the end of this financial year, 30 June 2023. So these are the incentives that were put in place by the previous government as a COVID-19 stimulus measure. What we've done with this guide is unpacked how you can build a business case, a robust financial business case, utilising those tax incentives for upgrading plant and equipment to be more efficient. So there's a significant opportunity associated with the next, I guess we're 11 months or so now, but this is something that I'd really encourage you. If you're interested in this, if this is piquing your interest, now is the time to get your head around this. This and all of the guides that I've described are all available at our Energy Briefing website, energybriefing.org.au, and I encourage you to go and have a look at those after our chat. All right, I'm going to run through very quickly some of the government incentives that are available. I mentioned energybriefing.org.au. It's hard to navigate, particularly if you've got sites in multiple jurisdictions. You've obviously got federal support, and then you've got different support available state by state. What we've done at the energybriefing.org.au site is we've made it our mission to keep abreast of the different government programs that are available and the different grant programs that are available. So we have a quarterly newsletter that you can sign up for at energybriefing.org.au, and it will alert you to new grants in the energy and carbon space, and it will give you the links that you need to go and find out more at the relevant government websites. So high level, there's various schemes that exist at the state level. Victorian Energy Upgrades, Energy Savings Scheme, and you've got the EEIS and the REPS in ACT and South Australia, respectively. There's a bunch of different equipment upgrades that are available through those schemes in the relevant states. I encourage you to take a look at those and seek expert advice. You've also got the Business Energy Advice Program that is run by Business Australia and supported by the federal government. That's also can be a source of guidance in terms of this space. And in Queensland specifically, the chamber up there runs the EcoBiz program funded by the Queensland government, and again is a source of advice and support. And there's a bunch of grants that are available, and I won't go through them one by one, but again, I encourage you to check out the Energy Briefing website for more detail on that front. We're getting to the tail end of my presentation, and I'm getting to the bit where I suggest where one might go for help. We run professional certification programs at the Energy Efficiency Council, so one of the places you can go for help is by going and seeking the guidance of an energy management systems advisor. This is a relatively new certification that we launched literally a month ago. So we currently have 10 certified professionals that have gone through rigorous training and gone through a rigorous assessment process to show that they can take a business from really scratch to a comprehensive energy management system. Energy management system, effectively, how you monitor and establish a continuous improvement process. Make sure you got the data, make sure you've got the executive buy-in, make sure you have the investment pipeline. As I say, that process of continuous improvement, always important, but specifically important when it comes to energy. And there was never a better time to invest in, the sophistication of your energy management system, as I'm sure we'll hear from Milad in a moment. And then just generally, I would say that the Energy Efficiency Council membership, which of course ABB is a leading member of the Energy Efficiency Council, but as I say, we have over 100 members with particular specialisations and expertise in different parts of the economy. I encourage you to check out eec.org.au for a full list of EEC members who can support you on that energy management journey. So that's me. There's the long the long disclaimer, which allows me to even mention tax issues. Again, not a tax expert, but really looking forward to Milad's presentation and really looking forward to the chat with Lisa and Milad later on in the session.
Thank you, Luke, for your input today. I'd now like to welcome our second speaker, Milad Mostafavala. Milad is the Product Marketing Manager for Digital Solutions with ABB's electrification business and plays a key role in supporting customers with their digital transformation journey and advancing the role of digitally connected and enabled solutions and services within the industry. Milad has more than 12 years of experience managing and delivering complex projects across a range of technical, engineering, and commercial functions for utilities and end users, and has held various engineering positions within ABB globally and locally here in Australia. Please welcome Milad Mostafavala.
A very good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this presentation. Very happy to be able to present on the energy management solution that we have across the digital portfolio. My name is Milad, and today what I have prepared for you is an introduction around energy trilemma. A couple of points around what are the consumers' concerns at the moment within the energy industry. I will then be taking you down to why digital energy management is able to accommodate those concerns. I will then talk about some of the functions that a good digital energy management is capable of having. And then I'll discuss a couple of categories of energy inefficiencies within electrification that I personally came across. And further on, I'll talk about how can we address these inefficiencies uh, throughout the journey for becoming more efficient. I will talk about the cost for the customers as well and why they are hesitating in order to get on board and get onto this journey on energy efficiency. I'll provide an example around the ROI, and I will close the presentation today with a few of the use cases. One from a commercial building example that will talk about its energy performance. Another one from an industrial plant example that will talk about its renewable performance. And another two further case studies around factory, small factory in terms of power factor and power quality performance, and transport application in terms of peak performance. So let's start. We are facing an energy trilemma at the moment. Obviously, the cost of energy and its affordability is increasing. That's for everyone across the industry. The reliability and essentially the security of access is also being jeopardized at the moment. And the visibility of consumers with their performance is also not clear, as in what it is that they are using at this moment in time. Consumers, on the other hand, they do have deep concerns around energy. As I mentioned, cost is a major factor. They would like to have reduction in their bills. At the same time, they would like to be more sustainable, so they would like to contribute to reduce their carbon footprint, but they don't know how they are able to do that. And thirdly, because the electricity usage is growing simultaneously in our market, the reliability of service is a sort of key important aspect. And these are the three main concerns that consumers are facing at this moment in time. Energy management can accommodate these concerns and essentially can meet up to the challenge of the energy trilemma. The reason for that is because it can reduce the consumption, it can try to help to lower the energy cost, it can also provide the reliability in service and reduce the operational cost for the consumers. And a digital energy management is able to meet and accommodate these. The reason for that is because with a digital energy management tool, a consumer is able to, first of all, monitor what's going on within their facility. Secondly, they are able to analyze those performance data. And based on those analytics, they will be able to make appropriate decision. Not only that, a digital energy management also provides significant key insight across the value chain, not just to the field engineers who are active and operating down in the field, but also to the executive part of any organization who is tasked to provide energy efficiency strategies and carbon footprint reduction strategies. So a digital energy management solution is able to provide these key insights across to any sort of users who is wanting to contribute in the journey. It is also able to provide that from any location and at any time. So it has quite a significant impact in terms of accessibility for users. So a good digital energy management system essentially starts from the field devices. It is able to pick up the data. It is able to essentially record appropriate values and items. And then it is able to aggregate those values and those data that it has essentially sensed. And at the end, it's able to analyze those aggregated data and provide those data to executives and people who are tasked for energy reduction schemes, carbon reduction schemes, and essentially tasked to develop strategies around that. So a function of a good digital energy management system is really starting from first the ability to be able to sense. Second is the ability to be able to communicate those sensed data. And thirdly is the ability to be able to process, analyze, and report those data. If we take one step further, essentially, and that would be the case when the energy management system would be able to predict and forecast the performance of a plant or a facility depending on past historical data. And that would be really the fourth function that would be quite suitable and important in a digital energy management tool. So monitoring, reporting, cost management, alerting, these are the important functions that any a good energy management solution should have them inbuilt and should be able to provide that. Here in ABB, we do have ABB Ability as our digital banner, and under ABB Ability as a digital platform solution, we have a solution that we called ABB Ability Energy Manager. But before I get into more specifics of the ABB solution that we have, I would like to talk about the energy inefficiencies. Based on my experience and based on what I came across with a variety of clients and customers, the main categories of energy inefficiencies for customers are around power factor, power quality, peak performance, and harmonics. And essentially, these are the main factors for customers that makes them being inefficient. And essentially, if these categories are able to be met and essentially fixed, they can significantly help a client to travel across within the journey of becoming more energy efficient. So in order to get on board and start in our journey to energy efficiency, there are a couple of steps that any customers, any clients need to take. The first step is obviously to be able to measure the consumption. The second is try to install or replace the energy efficient devices across their facility and plant. Third step is optimization. And then fourth one is being able to forecast and predict their performance in future scenarios based on past historical data. Um, as you can see, customers are hesitant to do this because if we take a bigger picture and bigger perspective, there's a cost involved for any customer in order to get on board with these steps and being able to essentially travel through those 4 steps to be more energy efficient. The solution for them here is to be able to utilize a digital energy management solution because it will then be able to assist them with these cost factors without them getting involved within the specifics and the needs. Here I have an ROI case example for a very small plant that had the exact same problem and was facing the same issue here. Um, Essentially, they had an energy bill. The contractual power that they had was around 400 kilowatt. The average energy consumption that they had was around 133. And essentially, given the price that they had for this facility set up, and when they didn't have any energy management system installed within the facility, they were looking at trying to essentially start their journey and essentially being able to reduce their consumption, but they didn't know where to start and how to commence this process. The first step is obviously to be able to benchmark and measure. The second step is being able to understand the behavior of the plant. And the third step is being able to reduce where possible, reduce consumption where possible. So in this case example, this specific customer was able to utilize some of our digital solution in terms of physical hardware and the installation of the platform for the energy manager. And you can see that the payback cost for this client was quite good in terms of return on investment. So within 2 years, they saw that they are able to essentially get a return on the amount that they are spending in terms of their existing installation, and they were able to eventually save close to $20,000 per year for their electricity bill, essentially. So some of the items that how a digital energy management is able to help an assist client is because it is able to provide with multi-site comparison. So it can essentially manage the demand and save that. It is able to provide that holistic view of the uh, essentially data, and it can maximize the performance of the equipment. So if there are early signs of poor equipment health that causes them to essentially consume more power and hence more energy and create an inefficient sort of operation for a plant, the energy management is able to quickly pick that and essentially alert around that. It's also able to provide a load profiling aspect with the help of changes in pattern that happens and occurs across the facility itself. So essentially, customers are able to utilize energy management solutions because it can increase and improve the performance, and it can provide them with a reduction in their operating cost. And they are able to simply create this through ease of use, plug and play, and cost effectiveness of the system that they are uh, installing. So scalability is very, very important in any energy management system that is being utilized for customer, and that's the main item that they would be looking for. So to wrap up what we talked about in terms of digital energy management and why it is able to accommodate the existing energy trilemma and the existing consumer concerns, is because the digital energy management is able to benchmark, then optimize, and essentially provide the significant insight in terms of where the efficiency can happen within a specific plant. Next, I will be taking you through a couple of use case examples that we were able to successfully implement. The first use case example is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. So obviously, Burj Khalifa, for those of you who traveled to Dubai or on a connecting flight, 163 stories height building, tallest building at the moment in the world. And essentially, it's a very, very large load installation itself. The energy management system that they were able to utilize and integrate within this facility from ABB was essentially able to provide them with a bird's eye view of the performance of the building itself. And it was also able to provide the real time data that essentially was very, very critical for their operation and being able to see what's going on across the building itself. Um, Here is a very sort of single day performance of a very small section of the load profile. You can see the highest load in the color of sort of orange is for the air conditioning unit system, and you can see that the time in the x-axis how it sort of displays in comparison to other loads that operates within the building itself. So that's our first use case. The second use case is an industrial application. So a group in New South Wales, they were looking at implementing digital energy management solution and infrastructure that they were able to monitor the performance across multiple physical locations for their asset and for their site. And when working with ABB, essentially we created the ABB Ability Energy Manager, an asset manager for them in a way that they could see the real-time monitoring of the substation with the key metrics that they were looking at. One of the major items for this client was being able to understand the renewable generation that they had across their sites and facility, and being able to compare that with their essentially grid input and the grid connections. Alerts and analytics was also another facet that they wanted to do. The reason for that was because they wanted to get on board with carbon footprint reduction, and the alerting system was essentially reducing travel time to physical location of the asset. Hence, they could contribute to that carbon footprint scheme that they wanted to do. Some graphical performance, you can see that the yellow performance is the renewable generation that they were able to detect and see, and the blue graph is the utility connection that they were able to sort of have from the grid, and a couple of other loads that they are able to sort of compare how they are tracking within their facility in this example. Another aspect which was very crucial for this client was monitoring the reactive power. So you can see they had quite a number of negative reactive power, and being able to detect that thanks to the digital energy management solution was also quite an important aspect for them. Next use case is a small manufacturing private company in Australia with their operation located in regional New South Wales and Victoria. This particular customer was looking for an energy management solution that was able to really accommodate measurement, alerts, and analytics for them. Their primary challenge really here was essentially they wanted to get a visibility on their KVAR power quality because they were being penalized for their KVAR. Also, they wanted to have real-time monitoring of the installed asset and really understand the behavior of their plant. And as you can see, by the end of essentially installing this energy management system, they were able to sort of understand and get a touch and feel of how their plant is operating. So just a reminder for the sort of positive reactive power is caused by the inductive loads, and the negative reactive power is caused by the capacitive load. So you can see that they did have a combination there, and through this energy management system installation, they were able to sort of understand and monitor their power quality. One of the other key aspects that they were suffering from within their facility was power factor. So the green dots are the power factor provided to them from the utility. So you can see it's quite good, but when it comes to their plant operation, they're suffering from some significant power factor values that's quite bad. And essentially, through the means of um, providing options for them, they were able to sort of improve that and bring that back up and essentially monitor the performance across their facility. So that was another use case that was able to successfully utilize the ABB Ability Energy Manager. Last use case for today is around a transport application. So this particular project had fragmented visibility across because the project was evolving constantly as a engineering, procurement, and construction project. And the primary challenge of this customer was essentially monitoring an environment that project landscape was constantly changing. And because of that, remote monitoring was almost impossible. Um, and they were looking for being able to utilize the electrical parameters across a variety of sections and substations. And this was not homogeneous to physical location, essentially. And they had been tasked to provide this data that's picked up to the end users and the state government. So um, what we were able to offer them in our consultation was an integrated energy management system that could monitor the electrification components of their asset and being able to integrate that to multiple stakeholders view and across the end users and the design and the commissioning teams as well. And that was what we were able to do. The other item was peak performance. So they were able to understand what is their peak performance across the facility, quite a significant peak. The times that you see it's reduced or down is essentially the weekend time or the time that the operation was off due to a number of reasons. And they were able to understand what the peak behavior is within their facility and being able to sort of manage that and reduce that. And as a result, they were able to reduce their total consumption from um, the time that they installed the system to be able to sort of reduce that and improve that by managing the peak performance that we just saw. So coming really towards the end of the presentation and as a summary of what we talked and what we discussed about. So digital energy management is able to accommodate those key energy trilemma issues and key customer concerns because it's able to provide that analytics that everyone needs to be able to make decisions and um, action where they need to improve and enhance their performance. A good energy management system would have a couple of key criteria. It needs to be secure, it needs to have resiliency, it needs to be scalable, and it needs to be able to operate across multiple sectors and be able to provide those items and information to a variety of parties and stakeholders across. And these are the function of a good energy management solution that we talked and discussed about. We also mentioned that how customers are able to improve their energy efficiency by using a digital energy management system. And we talked about the fact that going through these steps in our journey to energy efficiency has a cost factor, and the cost factor is the reason for hesitation, and being able to provide that payback period and return on investment and the sort of MPV calculation for clients is helping them to see the value and be able to get on board and wanting to go through the process of journey of energy efficiency. And last slide, really, just around our solution in terms of energy management. So ABB Ability Energy Manager is our main solution, which is used across a variety of segments. It can be incorporated for small, medium, and large enterprises. It can be also used for commercial and industrial customers. And we have been able to implement this across a variety of different segments such as building, e-mobility, data centers, utilities, food and beverage, transport, and industrial applications. If you are keen to learn more, please feel free to browse our website and look out for ABB Ability Energy Manager and ABB Ability Asset Manager. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Millard and Luke, for your presentations today. Luke, it was great to hear more about the resources available to businesses, particularly the briefing for Australian businesses, connecting experts and access to finance, the sector spotlights around manufacturing and agriculture, and also the leveraging tax incentives. And we note your disclaimer at the end of your presentation. There was also the summary of state and Commonwealth grants available, and for anyone who missed it, you can find them at energybriefing.org.au. And Milad, it was terrific to hear about digital energy management, giving us the ability to sense and communicate data, the ability to process, analyse and report the data, and then the ability to use predictive analytics when it comes to delivering improvements in energy efficiencies. It's now over to our audience. So thank you very much to everyone who has pre-registered questions and to those who have been able to log on their live questions. So I might go to our first question here directed to Milad. What quantum steps do we need to take as a nation to achieve a 43% reduction in our carbon footprint by 2030? Thanks, Milad.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Exactly, steps such as what we described today. Steps such as number one, utilize tools which are available and has a proven track record in performance. Tools such as digital energy management. Number two, create a benchmark, something to start with in order to commence the analyzing phase of our journey. And number three, being able to optimize this benchmark, this generated data, and look into where it can be improved. And number four, make decisions in where we can invest and spend to improve our energy efficiency and carbon reduction.
Okay, thanks,
Hey,
Millard.
Lisa, can I jump in there as well on that
Go
question?
for it.
Because I think it's a really important one. Totally agree with Millard. At the site level, that's absolutely right. If you pop it up a level to the policy level, how we're going to hit that 43% target and do it in a cost effective way is expand our conception about what emissions reduction looks like. Over the last 10 years, we've been having a big debate about transition in the supply side of the market. In my presentation, I mentioned the integrated system plan that was released by the Australian Energy Market Operator just last month. There is a strong consensus that we're decarbonising the grid over the next number of years by leaning into renewable technology. Our task now is to think about how we align our energy use with the availability of those renewable resources, and that requires a massive transformation behind the meter, both for households and for businesses. So the sorts of technologies and approaches that Millard is talking about and advocating for is one way that businesses can play a role in that transition to net zero emissions. And obviously there's the drivers that I talked about in terms of, the corporate social responsibility piece, the pressure that investors and consumers are placing on businesses to go on that journey. The leadership being shown by businesses who just see that it's the right thing to do. But it's coming together with this other great strategic driver, which is, as I pointed out in my presentation, these really, really challenging gas and electricity markets. And so by managing our energy better, by looking at opportunities for fuel switching, we can align our end use with the renewable resources that are increasingly going to become available over the next 10 years. And we can also help manage our costs through efficiency as well as fuel switching. Demand management is increasingly going to be a thing as well. So I'm just, I guess, advocating for an expanded conversation around that journey to 43% and ultimately to net zero, because we're all going to have to play our part.
Well, Luke, while you're advocating for that discussion, I might throw the first live question at you as well. You've talked about businesses and their commitment and how we've certainly seen a big upkick in the commitments being made by the ASX 200 companies. What's your thoughts on government getting involved and providing subsidies to keep energy costs competitive?
So we're in the pointy end of a crisis situation, and it's making the crisis that we experienced back in 2017 look relatively mild. I stepped our audience through some of the challenges we're seeing both in electricity markets, but particularly in gas markets. So look at this from a government perspective, look at this from a taxpayer perspective. If we are providing support in the form of subsidies to end users, and that's already happening in the household space, we may get to a point where it needs to happen in the business space as well, particularly for energy intensive businesses in the short term. We want to do that in as targeted a way as possible for as short a period as possible. One of the ways we can achieve that is through governments investing in programs to support businesses to improve the efficiency of their gas use, and to where appropriate and where the technology is ready to go to electrify. So there's a short-term piece which may involve subsidies, and there's a whole policy conversation about how we pay for that. That's probably another webinar. But in the medium and the long term, we can take the pressure off those businesses to support them to do things like putting energy management systems in place, upgrading equipment. And I think we're at a point where there's an opportunity for governments to step up and support this next phase of industrial transformation, which is aligning our industrial sector with the energy resources that are going to be available in the 21st century.
Okay. There's some great questions coming through about the role of innovation, and do we have all the technologies available to us at the moment to decarbonise? I'd say that's probably one that both of you would like to comment on.
Do you want to chip in first, Milad?
Sure. So we do have the tools necessary to be able to start the journey. We are not using them sufficiently, and that is the issue here, in my opinion. I believe that we need to be courageous and we need to start using these tools as efficiently as possible. And because they are coming through an adaptation phase, there's always the situation with being reserved or taking traditional approach, and we need to sort of be creative and start using these tools, tools such as energy management within a digital format can definitely help us commencing this journey.
So I would say I would agree with Milad that we have many of the tools available to us. In many cases, the near-term challenge is actually applying them in ways that are novel in an Australian context. In my presentation, I talked about utilising heat pumps for low-temperature process heat. Now, there's not a lot of that happening in Australia. It's one thing having the technology. You need to have the experience out of the market, both within particular industry subsectors. So if you're a food processor, being on the bleeding edge of that transition is quite a big call to make if none of your peers in the industry are using that technology. But then there's also the engineering expertise, the consultants, and even just the availability of those sorts of technologies in an Australian context. Just because it exists in Europe doesn't mean that it's particularly easy to access that technology in Australia. So I think there needs to be a focus on innovation over the next few years in the context of actually just applying technologies in innovation in skills and supply chains and building that practical experience. The good news is that recently the new federal government expanded the remit of the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, that has done a remarkable job supporting the effort to drive down the cost of renewables. They expanded the remit to cover energy efficiency and electrification. And so that should give ARENA an ability to focus in on those behind the meter uses that are aligned with the supply side transition. The one thing I'd say is that the government gave ARENA a couple more dot points on the to-do list without necessarily any extra funding. I'm hopeful that the other shoe will drop in the October budget, because there's a lot to do. But you can imagine a scenario where one of the ways we kind of navigate the next couple of years, and as I said, gas prices aren't likely to go down anytime soon, is we support businesses that are willing to stick their chin out, that are willing to get experience with this technology, to build up that ecosystem of expertise around it, to do those innovative projects, to utilise heat pumps in the context of various industrial processes and within food processes. I think that would be a great way to both gain experience with that technology, but accelerate its adoption across the Australian economy.
Thanks, Luke and Millard. Another live question that's come through is, given the increased use of solar as a source of electricity, should we be changing to time of day charging for electricity? Luke, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think there's absolutely a role for more market signals that help us align energy use with the times that energy is plentiful. I sort of talked about this on the way through. We've got this incredible solar resource in Australia on a per capita basis where we're leading the world, but it's actually causing some issues because there's all kinds of legacy infrastructure that are actually assumes that we should be using energy in the middle of the night. Where I am in Victoria, there's electric resistive hot water systems that are programmed to turn on in the middle of the night because they're designed to use latent coal-fired generation capacity that otherwise isn't going to be used, which in the context of the 70s or the 80s or whenever they had the idea to do that made a bit of sense. Doesn't make so much sense now, and the opportunity to move to high efficiency heat pumps that are turning on in the middle of the day to soak up some of that solar resource makes a lot more sense. I think our friends in the consumer advocacy space would raise some concerns and make sure that you manage effectively the equity impacts. Vulnerable households don't necessarily have a lot of choices around when they're using energy, and so there's concerns from the consumer space that we do that in a way that brings them along for the journey. But sure, in broad terms, we need more flexible demand side resources, and many of the things that Malad's been talking about gives businesses that granular understanding of the various loads across their sites and the ability to respond to some of those market signals in a way that that means the system as a whole is operating more efficiently and hopefully gets a better overall outcome, both in terms of doing core business, but also keeping those energy costs manageable for a particular business on a particular day.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks very much, Luke. Just wanted to add one more item to that one, Lisa, to Luke's point. Essentially, just imagine that the rise of the EV charging infrastructure would essentially overcomplicate this space as well, and that will create that need in terms of being able to be flexible in terms of demand responding to the changes that occurs within the network. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Malad, while you've got the mic, let's go with another one for you. What is the focus we as engineers should have in a digital and sustainable energy sensitive age?
Very good. That's a fantastic question. Essentially, it's to implement this mechanism in our design, in our day-to-day activities. When we are being requested for a solution or essentially for consultation, remembering that energy efficiency strategies and carbon footprint strategy is a prime focus in our answers, and keeping these strategies at forefront of our approach when we have been requested for input, for advice, for consultation. In my opinion, this is where we should rise up to the challenge and start having an open conversation, get excited about our leading role, and not just being afraid of proposing new technologies, really be creative and push through adapting to technological advancement rather than sticking to traditional approach or taking a very conservative view, simply not accepting the norm and essentially moving along with what has been tried before, essentially trying to think of making an impact and think of this as an opportunity for us as engineers to be able to make a difference within the energy efficiency space.
Thank you. Luke, the next one I've got is for you, and it's really poignant at the moment with the prices of energy. There's plenty of small businesses, small and medium businesses, that are really hurting at the moment. They're very energy intensive. What sort of support do you think they need to navigate the next few years?
So many of those businesses, and I'm conscious we've got businesses that are large and small on the line, and that can correlate to the sophistication of a strategy, but not always. There's some very sophisticated small businesses, but in the main, if I was to kind of give you a rule of thumb, the smaller business you are, the less likely you are to have really good submetering for both gas and electricity. And the less likely you are to have a robust energy management system. When I talk about energy management systems, I'm talking like in the ISO 14001 sense of the world. There's actually an ISO standard for energy management systems, ISO 50001, but you don't need to go to that extent. You just need a coherent process which is tracking your energy use, identifying those opportunities for continuous improvement, having that executive buy-in. I think there's an opportunity to support businesses that haven't yet quite got to that point, to put the submetering in place, to get that granular understanding of what's going on in their site, and then you utilise that as the basis for setting up an energy management system. The New South Wales government has metering and submetering grants out of the market at the moment, because they recognise that that good hygiene around your energy use, really knowing what's going on, is kind of like a key success factor for navigating the next 20 years as a business. Because then once you've got information, you've got the ability to leverage that information to make decisions. So that's kind of basic infrastructure. It's not super sexy. It's not super interesting in and of itself. It doesn't solve any issues, but it gives you the basis on which to make good decisions. Then, of course, I think there is a role for government, particularly at a moment of crisis, in supporting businesses to upgrade key pieces of equipment. And that can be to more efficient equipment, or it can, as has been a bit of a theme and what I've been talking about, there is an electrification opportunity for many low temperature processes. I should acknowledge I'm kind of talking a lot about sort of manufacturers and food processors, because that's sort of what's top of mind for me. I've been going through over the last week the very serious challenges that those energy intensive sectors are facing from some of these significant imposts in terms of gas and electricity prices. But there's other parts of the economy that aren't necessarily as energy intensive that are grappling with some of the same issues, perhaps not facing such intense pressures. But if you're looking at the built environment, for example, if you're looking at the property sector and that incredible extant resource of commercial buildings that exists around the country, there's a huge task there to improve the efficiency, the affordability, the amenity. Electrifying those buildings is going to be a huge task. I put that on Lorena's to-do list as well. And I think there's a role for governments in supporting that sector along their journey as well.
Thanks, Luke. Given that we've got 900 people registered for this event, and I've still got a handful of questions coming through, I'm trying to group them, but please feel free to pop in any further questions that you'd like. Millard, I've got one here for you, and it's one I'm particularly passionate about. Talking about predictive analytics in the oil and gas and mining industries. I've had my own experience with this and how valuable it is in energy efficiencies and making sure that we aren't replacing big pieces of kit, that we're actually tracking them. So the question is more around ABB's energy management solutions, working on the basis of predictive analytics. And it looks like someone would like you to elaborate a bit on that. And does this solution work for oil and gas and mining?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Lisa. The beauty of digital energy management is the two elements, and the two elements are the prediction and the second one is forecast. And that's the beauty of digital energy management in comparison to the traditional mode of energy management. In terms of adapting this prediction and forecast, obviously the way they work is they operate based on past historical data. They do take into account a variety of information such as time of use, performance throughout the day of the week, and essentially trying to use that historical data and create a prediction portfolio in terms of performance for feeders and for your loads. And yes, that's how they operate. In terms of using this application for oil and gas and mining application, yes, they are quite useful for these two types of clients. I myself have been able to assist with a mining case most recently, which they are trying to adapt with this new form of using analytics and prediction to be able to plan and forecast their future performance. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Millard. I'm going to move on to a question for Luke now, which has come in on the live feed. It says here, in various studies and industry follow-ups, there is no indication of performance indicators, i.e. 2050 net zero, and tracking of how we're performing to benchmark indicators. So Luke, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. So I've actually just returned from a delegation to Germany. One of the dot points that got read out at the start of the webinar, I'm a co-chair a bilateral working group on energy efficiency between Australia and Germany. And so I was over there a few weeks ago, and we were actually talking to the German government about targets. And one of the interesting things, we talked about the 43% target and how we can achieve that. That's an economy-wide target. There's no granular detail about how different parts of the economy are going to achieve target. But what they do in Germany is they actually set sectoral targets that adds up to their overarching target. So in a German context, they're seeking to reduce their emissions by 65% by 2030. And off the 1990 base. And for anyone that thinks 43% is a bit challenging, Germany, one of the leading industrial nations of the world, is targeting an emissions reduction quite a bit more than that. So that's useful international context. But they are sort of defining a trajectory for residential buildings and commercial buildings and for industry and for the energy sector. And that does more than just give policymakers something to focus on. It actually gives industry for example, or commercial buildings or whatever it is, a benchmark which they as businesses can reflect on in terms of their own decarbonisation journey. Are we ahead of the curve in terms of the broader economic transition, or are we behind the curve and do we need to do more? And so in terms of I think that's incredibly useful, and it's actually something we've been talking to the government about in the future, whether it's formally in terms of legislation as exists in Germany, or in the reports of the Climate Change Authority, which will be reporting annually moving forward on Australia's progress, actually setting clear expectations about what we hope each sector of the economy to achieve is incredibly helpful. It also means that, as well as within businesses, investors and other stakeholders can have a clear sense of how a particular organisation is doing relative to that average. So I think it's a really good question, and I think those sorts of KPIs can be incredibly useful.
I think it's a great point you've made, Luke, about making sure that the sectors are clear on what they're trying to achieve. Would certainly help everyone look at their investment and have a bit of stability going forward. Milad, a question for you. Another favourite topic, electric vehicles. So could you comment on the implementation of electric vehicles, bidirectional charging for energy management, in particular V2H or V2G?
Great question. So in terms of vehicle to grid and in terms of grid to vehicle, in my opinion, it depends on which stakeholder you are presenting. If you are looking as a network operator, it's definitely an advantage and can be used as a strengthening sort of positive view. If you are the owner of the electric vehicle who will be facing a sort of battery decharge and not being able to manage or not being able to control that as an owner, and at the same time facing the wear and tear of the battery for your own vehicle, obviously you don't want to participate in that. So it really depends on which side of the stakeholder management system or angle you are looking at in terms of this. There is lots of people who are pro and lots of people who are against. And in my opinion, I believe, again, it comes back to the fact that if the energy management tool is capable of managing this, it can create some value and it can sort of help. But at the same time, it needs to be a sort of participating option, and it shouldn't be a compulsory factor, in my opinion.
Okay, thanks, Milad. Luke, I'm going to throw to you. You mentioned that a lot of companies are committing to net zero and that energy management has a big role to play. What about carbon offsets? Can't they do much of the heavy lifting is the question.
So carbon offsets will have a role to play. And, if we think about the net zero, net zero doesn't mean absolute zero. It means balancing the emissions that are being produced with, offsets in other parts of the economy. And an individual economy could plausibly get to net zero by paying a lot of money for offsets without doing very much in their business. But there is no plausible way that we, as an overarching economy, offset our way to net zero. There aren't enough trees to plant. It's not going to happen. And those offsets are actually finite and precious resources that we will need to conserve for parts of the economy that have genuine challenges, and there may just not be any plausible technical solutions, even by the time we get to the 2040s, for certain parts of the economy. And certain parts of the chemical sector, for example, incredibly hard to abate, and producing things that we as human beings really value. So offsets, can be a stepping stone for businesses. But what we say to businesses is, look, as we move through the 2020s, you can expect your stakeholders to be relatively unimpressed with net zero commitments that are met with a lot of offsets. And the expectation is going to be that you're actually, as my old sort of business development manager said when she was looking at a project, it has to wash its own face. You can't be sort of, looking to mother or father or anyone else to kind of clean your face for you. You've got to take care of your own business. And so in terms of those scope 1 emissions, in terms of those scope 2 emissions, there is I think going to be increasing pressure on businesses to actually change things about how they're running their own operations in that journey to net zero. The good news is, as more and more businesses do that, as we've seen in the renewable energy space, as we gain experience, as the technology cost curves come down, the engineering expertise gets built up, the costs of making those changes within businesses will go down as well. But I think we're going to be going through an innovation curve behind the meter over the next decade, which equals the innovation curve that we've seen in front of the meter in terms of large and small scale renewables. So it's a bit of a provocation, I suppose, for businesses to think beyond offsets, but it's also an incredibly exciting time. And I think businesses that take a leadership position on this can obviously they can lead their sector, but they can also help do their part in that broader community effort to achieve net zero emissions.
Thanks, Luke. Millard, we're getting down to the last few minutes, so this will be the last question for you. And then, Luke, have a look at the live questions, and I'll come back to you after this. Millard, would you like to elaborate on why digital energy management is able to accommodate both consumer concerns and the energy trilemma?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. Because it can act as a gravitational force to balance the two sides of this seesaw. So at one side, consumers are desperately seeking reliability in the energy while reducing their electricity costs with a change in their usage behavior. On the other side, energy market is seeking clarity, visibility, meaning they want to know a forecast that's as close as possible to an actual reality, a prediction of some sort. And that enables them to manage their usage and planning. When we mentioned this, is probably in the past, when we talk about planning, we talk about next year's. But now, when we talk about planning, we are using this term as in we are looking at the next hour, next sort of day, next morning. So essentially, that's how the landscape is changing, and that's how this can help both sides.
Okay, thanks, Millard. And Luke, last one for you. Is the EEC vested with some regulatory role to regulate the energy efficiency market and its practitioners, similar to that of the Clean Energy Council registering the RE practitioners?
It's a great question. And the Clean Energy Council, the peak body for the renewable energy sector, has this solar installer accreditation, which has played a key role in the rollout of small scale PV in state and federal programs over the last 10 or 15 years, and created a sense of confidence in governments in terms of rolling out those sorts of programs. The Energy Efficiency Council has actually just launched a certification scheme which is in the same genre, but because the energy management sector is a much more diverse sector than the renewables sector, we need to think about it in a slightly different way. So the energy efficiency certification scheme has recently evolved in the EEC Professional Certifications Framework, launched just last month, and we now have certifications out in the market. I've mentioned the ENMS Advisor certification, but we also have certifications for the individuals that can lead and manage a comprehensive commercial building retrofit. And interestingly, we also just took on the certification that was resting with the Clean Energy Council and is now sitting with us for insulation installers, So a certification focused on the industrial sector, the commercial building sector, and the residential sector. So we're looking to make it as easy as possible for governments to build policy and programs in this space. We see that industry has a role in supporting that transition. If governments can see that industry is helping to train and certify novel skills that don't currently exist in the market or don't exist in enough numbers in the market, it's much more likely that government's going to meet us halfway and start to build some of those important policy and programs. And of course, what I always say is that we as an industry are not looking for government to, subsidise these sorts of things out into the never. It's actually about creating an enabling ecosystem, which can then, you can have private finance and capital come in and actually drive the market beyond a certain point. But there is some initial investments and support from government working with industry where we can accelerate activity in this space in every sector of the economy.
Thanks, Luke. That's a great note for us to finish on. It's all we've got time for today. Please join me once again in thanking Luke Menzel and Milad Mostafavala for their time and input on this hot topic of rethinking energy management in the digital age. I'd like to thank Engineers Australia and their industry partner ABB for their support. And if you could please complete the short feedback form, which is linked in the description box below to help us improve and plan our future events. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next Thought Leaders event. Thanks.